Are we seeing a slowdown in demand for EVs?
There's no doubt that there's a slowdown happening. If you just look at dealer inventories on the lots, particularly in the US, we actually have that data. The days inventory is actually a lot higher for EVs than ICEs. So there's definitely a demand issue. I think what's happening is the early adopters that bought a lot of the $70,000 and $80,000 Teslas, they're all gone now. So now we're to the main street kind of consumer of these products. They don't necessarily know how an EV works and how to charge them. So there's some misconception of how it works. And so we think a lot of the early adopters already bought these vehicles, and now we're into this like main street view. So there's definitely something happening near term, but we think longer term, a lot of these problems will be resolved. And we actually think the EV thesis is very much still intact. But right now, we're definitely in this kind of soft spot period.
What is the reason for that? I mean, you mentioned these sort of misconceptions about what EVs are, sort of lack of familiarity, but to what extent does it come down to price and lack of infrastructure as the key deterrents here?
Yeah, you just named two of the three things that we found in our surveys. Charging infrastructure is a big one. Pricing is a big one. The other one is form factor. So in the US particularly, SUVs and pickup trucks are really in high demand. It's hard to make an EV that has battery range that's so unaerodynamic. But really, charging infrastructure is the one that comes up the most. So we have a data science team, RBC Elements, that scrubbed over 100,000 data points and showed that actually in the US and Western Europe, charging infrastructure is actually okay if you look at vehicle density per charging point. It's just people don't realize it. We don't see it like signs like where a petrol pump is. We don't know where it is for charging infrastructure. Also, there is an issue where there may be a charging point, but it may not be working. So that's a criticism that comes up a lot. But a lot of these things, I think, do get resolved. And pricing, as you pointed out, that has to come down. You know, pricing right now is up 35–40% since 2019 levels. We've all tried to buy a new car and seen how much it costs. And EVs are actually priced above ICEs. So we think that will come down definitely next year and the year after that. That should help resolve some of these demand issues.
I would like to look at how politics could impact the sector here, because of course we have now the Europeans looking at Chinese EV makers. And I was just wondering, you know, if the EU does reach a stage where they actually impose tariffs on Chinese automakers, what could be the impact of that on the market?
Yeah, I mean, I would be very suspicious if the EU actually did that. Remember that the German OEMs are very dependent on the Chinese. And if you really look at electrification, right, Europe is farther along in electrification. And yet the US is the one that has the IRA legislation. Why doesn't Europe have it? It's really because they're worried about the Chinese and not wanting to hurt them. So I think there's a real obstacle for the EU to really enact tariffs.